Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, taking my stab at predicting this Texas A&M depth chart heading into 2025. And not only is this kind of exciting for me to start, mapping out what I think this Texas A&M team is going to look like, but I think just as importantly and as fun for me is talking with you guys in the comment section. A lot of different position battles, a lot of different ways this Texas A&M depth chart could kind of fall in place going into 2025. I'm sure many of y'all are looking at this and saying this kid's an idiot. I would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. I think that's the beauty of doing it. I think secondly, one, it gives us a feel for what this team looks like. And, as we go through this conversation, we can start looking at this roster and saying, all right, maybe this is a position where we still want to see Texas A&M address in the transfer portal going into 2025. But as I'm putting this depth chart together, one, to me, it's a pretty clear picture of what this team looks like. And I think you got a pretty complete team going into 2025. And I think secondly, it kind of highlights what Mike Elko did in the offseason. There's a lot of guys that are either going to be true freshmen or guys that were added in the transfer portal that I think are going to be difference makers for Texas A&M early in 2025. It's hard to argue that this Texas A&M team did not get better going into 2025. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, Texas A&M fans, one, been a blast talking this team. The amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas, it means the world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. I'm sure many of y'all got some problems with the depth chart. We'll chop it up down there. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start the most important position in football, quarterback Marcel Reed. You probably won't find many who are higher on Marcel Reed heading into 2025, and I say that fully acknowledging it. It wasn't perfect in the 2025 year or 2024 year, excuse me. I give Mike Elko a lot of credit for saying, hey, there's not a ton of difference makers in the transfer portal at the quarterback spot. I think we like Marcel Reed more than a lot of quarterbacks that were available in the transfer portal. Instead of kicking around, adding another quarterback to the room that's going to compete. And if I know they added Jacob Zeno, that's more of a depth piece. I think the focus was let's go build around Marcel Reed. And you look at all the reasons to believe Marcel Reed takes a step in 2025. And let's just start with this. As a redshirt freshman, as a quarterback that hadn't played much football until he was thrusted into the starting role, thought Marcel Reed played pretty damn good. And there's a lot of intriguing traits that he brings to the table that's going to give a lot of defensive coordinators headaches. And so the combination of Marcel Reed just getting better as a football player as he gets more reps in practice, being that quarterback one, and then you combine Coach Colin Klein tweaking the offense to really be built around Marcel Reed, which is going to look a little bit different than it was under Connor Wigman. And then I think finally, probably the biggest storyline is there's just better players around Marcel Reed as well. I don't think it's unfair to say, hey, Texas A&M just didn't have enough difference makers on the outside last year. That's kind of been flipped on its head heading into 2025. And so for all of those reasons, one, I think Marcel Reed was pretty damn good for Texas A&M in the 2024 year. If he gets better in 2025 with better talent around him, I think you could look at a quarterback that does some real damage in the SEC in the 2025 season. Now, I think the biggest storyline is you're going to be back healthy at running back, Le'Veon Moss, Ruben Owens. When the running back room got hurt off early with Ruben Owens going down in fall camp, and then the injuries just kept coming. Le'Veon Moss and Ruben Owens, that represents to me one of the better running back rooms that we're going to see in the SEC. Behind an offensive line that I thought took some massive steps in the right direction under Coach Adam Cushing, is returning a lot of guys that played a lot of football for Texas A&M in 2024. This offensive line, the players are getting better under Adam Cushing, and then you combine that with the continuity. Like Texas A&M, a lot of these guys played a lot of football with each other in 2024, which matters on the offensive line. I don't think it's crazy that this offensive line gets better. This running game, combined with Marcel Reed's legs, it's going to be a problem for a lot of the teams in the SEC. But I think the biggest storyline for Texas A&M is just getting significantly better at wide receiver, right? You bring in Casey Concepcion, who I think was such a massive get because he's that guy that can really make a difference on the outside in a multitude of different ways. Texas A&M just didn't really have that. Noah Thomas showed some flashes. There's no doubt about that, but he wasn't exactly a multi-dimensional wide receiver. You look at Jabri Barber, I think was a really solid slot wide receiver, but again, it's probably the extent of his impact on Texas A&M. You get Casey Concepcion involved, he so many different ways that he can hurt an opposing defense. And quite frankly, I'm gonna say the same thing for Terry Bussey. And Terry Bussey was a true freshman, kind of a gadget guy to primarily kind of a gadget guy as a freshman. That's another difference maker who can make a difference in a lot of different ways. You're bringing former five-star Micah Hudson. You have five-star wide receiver Jerome Miles coming in. You're bringing Mario Craver from Mississippi State, who had a phenomenal freshman year. It's top to bottom. It's a better wide receiver room with a lot more variety in terms of how these guys can get involved in an offense. And I highlight Terry Bussey because I'm just interested to see what they decide to do with Terry Bussey. I think me personally would like to see him stay on offense just because this kid with the football in his hands, I think that's the way he has the biggest impact on the football game. Now, if y'all wanted to move him to defensive back, I wouldn't argue. Like, look, Terry Bussey, wherever he's going to play on the football field, he's going to be damn good at it. But I think what I would probably just me sitting in my basement suggestion here is that I would pick a position for him and let him really develop there. You know, whether that's running back, whether that's wide receiver, whether that's defensive back, let him pick a position and become great at it. Because whatever position he picks, he's going to be great at. I personally would like him to stay at wide receiver. Again, offensive line, there's two things that I look at with the offensive line. One, this unit got better. Two, you have a lot of continuity coming back in 2025. And number three, it's deep. I mean, Coley at center played phenomenal. And now that allows you to get really creative with Mark Naboo, who's probably the sixth man off the bench. If you have to plug and play him at guard for a game, you certainly know you can. I think you can say a lot of the same things for Ruben Fothery, who gives you guard tackle versatility. And then Lamont Rogers coming in, I would not be surprised if Lamont Rogers is in the two deep for Texas A&M in 2025. I don't always say that about true freshmen, but I look at Lamont Rogers and I say that this kid's built to play early in the SEC. He's just physically ready to do so. You got continuity on the offensive line. I think you got the right coaching staff in place. These guys are getting better, and you're deep. Like that's the bones of good offensive line heading into 2025, and it's only going to get better because Mike Elko is starting to stack offensive linemen on the recruiting trail. I look at the offense and say we're checking a lot of boxes. Now you go over to the defensive side of the football. I think the biggest question for me is let's look at this defensive front. I know Mike Elko highlighted the secondary as being a problem late in the season, which I don't think he's necessarily wrong. And Mike Elko has a lot better understanding of this team than I do. I look at the secondary and I chalk up the problems with the secondary to new coaching staff with a lot of new faces. And I spelled Dalton Brooks' name wrong. To me, another year with all of these guys in the same room is probably you're just going to get better because of the chemistry. And so I think there's a reason that it's not like Texas A&M was getting super desperate to bring in defensive backs. I think the personnel in the secondary is dang good. Now we just got to get that secondary playing dang good as a unit. And you bring in Jordan Shaw, who I think can plug and play right away at nickel. You're bringing Julian Humphrey, who very well could start at the boundary cornerback spot. I think Will Lee's a lock. And then I think you see Des Ricks and Julian Humphrey probably battle it out for the boundary cornerback spot. At the end of the day, I think there are a lot of good players in this room. Now they just got to play better as a unit. Torian York and Scooby Williams coming back at off-ball linebacker. Noah McKell is a guy that I think could play early as a freshman, so we'll kind of monitor where he finds himself on the depth chart. But you return your two guys. And Scooby Williams took a massive step from what he was at Florida. It wasn't perfect for Scooby Williams, but it was a heck of a lot better, than what it was in 2023 at Florida. What if he takes another step? Now, I think the biggest question mark here is the defensive line, and it's not necessarily the top end talent. To me, it's a little bit more of the depth, specifically on the inside of the defensive line. Look, Cassius Howell, Rylan Kennedy, TJ Searcy, Deion Hayes, Sam and Pemba. I look at the edge position and say, I think you're good there. I think Cassius Howell is a really good football player. I think Rylan Kennedy is going to be a very good football player. My biggest concern here is on the inside. You know, you want these big 300-plus pound bodies to be able to rotate and stay fresh. I think we know what we have with Albert Regis. pretty reliable piece going into 2025. DJ Hicks is probably the biggest question mark here. Like, do we get DJ Hicks, 5-star DJ Hicks in 2025? Because he hasn't been bad the first 2 years, but he hasn't necessarily been a 5-star. And year 3 is normally that year where we see line of scrimmage players take that jump. DJ Hicks might be the most important player, in my opinion, to monitor during spring and fall camp. If he's a dude for Texas A&M, some of the worries about the interior defensive line get melted away. You like what you have with Tyler Onium. Dalen Evans is another really important guy to monitor along with DJ Sanders. Dalen Evans, DJ Sanders is going to be a true freshman. My biggest concern here is depth. If DJ Sanders can be a guy that as a freshman can give you 15 to 20 snaps, if Dalen Evans can give you 25 to 30 snaps, all of a sudden you look at the defensive line and say we feel pretty good. But it is a position that I think Mike Elko probably wanted to address a little bit more than he did. And that would be that last position that I look at and say, you probably want to add one more guy like Tyler Onium. A guy that we don't need him to be a first-team All-SEC guy, but we need him to be able to give us 20-plus quality snaps a game. That's probably the last position I'll look at and say, it's what I'd like to see them address. Outside of that, like you start going through the checklist and say, Marcel Reed's only getting better in 2025. So you're better at quarterback. You're going to be better at running back just because you're getting all your guys back healthy. Significantly better at wide receiver. You only get better at offensive line because you're keeping all your guys in the fold. The only position that I think might get worse is the defensive line. And that's very contingent on what does DJ Hicks look like? What does Dalen Evans look like? What does freshman DJ Sanders give us? That's the only position I look at this depth chart. Defensive line, I mean interior defensive line and edge. Outside of that, every single position gets better for Texas A&M. And so I'm looking at the defensive line. A unit 12 months ago was the best on paper, and I think it might have you could argue it underperformed in 2024. On paper was the best position. Now it's probably the position we have the most question marks about. But the rest of the roster, like, man, I'm looking at it and say, find me the glaring holes in this roster. And if you get a big step from Marcel Reed, you better watch out for this Texas A&M team. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Let it fly in the comment section. Any problems with the depth chart, would love to hear from y'all, and we'll talk to you guys later. Peace.